certainly the description of my neighborhood and that cellar area was right on target. It was a place I didn't want to go to, and to tell your viewers, this was kind of a cellar that was attached to the building where I lived, and you kind of go in where there was a laundry machine, but it was, as I mentioned in the book, it could have been the set for Psycho, this dark basement room where you discover the body of the dead mother. In this case, you discover this teenage coupling having sex in the back corridor. And a vivid scene, I have to say.
And then she went on to torment you after that.
Oh, yeah. Again, it's a coming of age. It's coming of age is discovering one's own place in this world. And that deals with girls, it deals with sex, it deals with just growing up, physiologically growing up and coming to terms with your own body that is going through all of these changes, as we all know. And I think that, again, is one of the pulls of the book, because, we're not only going through physical changes, but psychological changes. We're discovering ourselves. We're discovering the others out there, and a magical, mystical, frustrating time that we go through.
Your scene with your mother speaking with John Kennedy.
Yeah.
Did that actually happen?
I have to admit that didn't happen. But John Kennedy was, in fact, a Bronx boy. Everything about that history, all the history in the book actually is true. John Kennedy, in fact, did have a speech on Concourse, just as I describe it taking place. More than 20,000 people showed up for that rally. I have the pictures. In fact, I show one picture. There's a series of pictures in the book. One photograph shows him on that platform that I described. But as it turns out, not only was John Kennedy a hero of mine growing up, but interestingly enough, he spent, and not very many folks actually know this, he spent ages 10 through 12 here living in the Bronx. His house still stands. In fact, a picture of that house is in the book. I still live in the Bronx in Riverdale. I live about 3 blocks from the Kennedy mansion. So that ending chapter where I go back to that house is quite accurate. I've gone to that house a number of times and just stood there on the grounds. It's abandoned. The house is abandoned for many years now. And that really inspired a lot of that book. In fact, in the book, there's a class photo of John Kennedy with his Riverdale Country School classmates.
He froze.
Was a Bronx boy. And he went to school in the Bronx. Interestingly enough, as I discovered in the research, Lee Harvey Oswald spent several years living in the Bronx. And who knew that? So here is the assassin of John Kennedy living in the same borough, not too far from where I'm living also, from Tremont Avenue on 178th Street. The geography is close to Tremont Avenue. And John Kennedy, who lived close by where I am now, and these two men, of course, meet in such a tragic circumstance. So that history, and there's a whole lot of history in the book having to do with the start of Vietnam, the civil rights movement, which actually certainly plays into the story, with my friendship with the Joe Bailey character. So that's what I think makes this book so heartwarming for me. It's not just a book about growing up. There are so many books like that, but I think it takes place at a special place and time. Not only is my neighborhood changing, not only am I changing as an individual, but the world is changing. Our United States is changing. So there are those parallels that run deep, I think, in the book. I hope it comes through.
It absolutely comes through. And as you said, it's not just a coming of age book because it is so rich in the history of the time and so real. It takes you right back. Did Kennedy influence any of your later political inclinations, or should we stay away from that subject?
Absolutely not. in fact, John Kennedy was, I mean, just as I mentioned in the book, you know, I grew up during the gray days of the Eisenhower years. And it was great. You know, I didn't identify with those years just as a kid, of course. But then comes the day glow colors of the 60s. I mean, we moved from gray, black and white to these bright colors. And Kennedy was emblematic of this youthful new movement that was coming on the cusp of a whole range of political changes that were going to ensue during those years. And of course, I spend a chapter, as you know, talking in very real terms about sitting at that television set for those 4 days in November. And that was absolutely how I remember it, the shock of losing my hero. And I set that up, of course, with a fictional scene where I do meet him on the concourse, imagining what that relationship would be like. But then the very real emotional connection I had to those 4 days, just watching that. And later on, I did, politically speaking, I did strongly identify with his brother, Robert Kennedy, which I don't get into, of course, in this book. But what a, you know, it leaves open that question, the what if question. What if, where would we be if Kennedy had lived, if Robert Kennedy had lived, if Martin Luther King had lived? You know, that was a tragic decade for all of us who, regardless of your political inclinations, frankly, you know, who lived during those times. And of course, a war that was very, very divisive. Now, Laura, can I ask you for a timeout for a second? I'm seeing I'm running out of battery here.
Oh, my. Can you plug in?
Can we hit a pause button for a second?
Yes.
While I actually put, I'm so sorry.
All right. So I have to talk about where you learned compassion. And I want to tie this in with what you talk about with the missing boy. And you weave the story of the missing young boy, Benji, and that was based on an actual event that happened, sadly. A little 6-year-old boy gone missing. But talk to me about where you learned compassion, because it comes through brilliantly in this book. And I feel everything that you're feeling.
Yeah. I mean, I've been very fortunate. I've come from a family where the very common denominator is that compassion, that love, that connection. My parents were truly role models in the sense that they actually suffered hardship here as immigrants in America, trying to make good, doing whatever they needed to not only support their family, but just love their family. We were just that type of, you know, tribe, you know, and not just a family of the 5 of us, because the characters in the book are real. There's Rosie, there's my dad Mac, my brother Fred. They're all here. And so are my aunts and cousins. My Aunt Selma is a very real character, and there's a chapter about how Aunt Selma did away with my comic books, my Superman comic books. We could talk about that one, but that incident is as real as my memory tells me. And it's a humorous but poignant scene in my connection with my beloved Aunt Selma, who is still around today. But my family itself was just they gave the book the heart of this book, because it was easy actually to write, because it is real. It was real. So if readers feel that connection, it's because it comes from that place. And
I don't think you have to hope anymore that your readers will feel these things, because it does. It comes through brilliantly. Yeah. How did you think of the idea of using that story of the missing boy as a thread that goes through your story? How'd that come about? Or who suggested it? Or did you just know that had to happen?
The Eitan Pate story was, I've been following it for many years. It was for a period of time, the 6-year-old boy who was taken off the streets of Manhattan. really riveted the attention, especially, I don't know how it played nationally, but certainly here in New York. And actually just recently, last year, did they supposedly find the killer of Aton Pace. Now, this killing took place in the early 80s. So it is outside the time frame of the book, but certainly a tragedy that has stayed with me for so many, many years. And so I wanted to bring him home, as I say in my notes. I wanted to find,
and don't give away too much, because readers should read what you've done with this.
I know. But just in thinking about Aton Pace and what his parents must have gone through, what this little boy must have gone through, I don't want to sound too maudlin here, frankly, because the book is really not that book. It's not.
No,
it doesn't go there. But his story is a story about another child. It's a story about one kid and other children. It's also a story about Aton Pace. Even if he's not a major character necessarily in the book, he's still part of the heart of this book. So, yeah. So that's why he's there. And it's amazing when you write a novel, I'm sure you've experienced it too, Laurel, how your memory starts to kind of leap to other areas. Memories you thought were long gone actually come to mind. And that spurs other memories. And in turn, wow, look, the avalanche of memories start to hit you, and you can't write it fast enough or organize it clearly enough to make it real. But that is the labor of love. That's the joy of writing this particular book. I've written others, as I mentioned. That was more of an academic exercise where I had to put pieces together in a very objective fashion. This was hardly that. And this was another experience altogether. And one that, even when I talk about the book, it just, there's emotions that rise just in thinking about those episodes that are very real.
Well, you light up and you become very animated, and they say that if you're writing and you just can't write fast enough, then you're on a great roll and you're doing something amazing. Who did your editing?
Actually, I have a small publisher out on the West Coast, Black Opal Books. They've been very, very writer friendly, I have to say. There's two parts to writing the book. There's writing the book, and then there's publishing the book, as we all know as writers. And publishing the book was more difficult than writing the book, I'll be honest with you. I tried to get an agent first, and since my name was not Stephen King or James Patterson, I had a little bit of a problem with that. And the same thing, the publishing market really has changed since I last published the other two books. And finally, I find this small publishing house that just had their arms wide open, and they really enjoyed the book. And the book is actually just came out last week, frankly, in hardcover. So they not only published the ebook version, but the paperback version, which came out first. They said, well, let's try the hard book as well, which I was delighted with because I like the feel of a hard book and hardcover book. And so it's actually out in all three editions. And we also have this authors group. So we're this kind of coterie of writers who online, we talk to each other online through this authors group. And it's a wonderful, wonderful community of writers and a very giving community because we share ideas. In fact, I got to learn about Alligator's Earth through
June Trope. Yes. I interviewed June Trope a while ago.
And she's been very generous, June has been. And so there's Black Opal Books. For writers who want to get their work out there, I find these folks very, very writer friendly, and they get my endorsement for sure.
Well, that's wonderful. And coming back to your book, which, by the way, I just got mine in paperback like the day before you said that it was coming out in hardback, but it's still awesome. It's still amazing. Black Opal Books. Your bike accident and coming home to all your comic books missing. What was up with your aunt?
Oh, Aunt Selma. Back to Aunt Selma. All right. So it plays out. Just as I mentioned, I was this comic book aficionado. I might brag. And Superman was the man, as is very clear in this book. And I kind of get into some of the history there of Superman. But I had this collection of Superman comics. We joke about it today in our family. If I had kept those comics, right, I would be on, in a state in Florida, with swimming pool. But my Aunt Selma actually came over one day and she cleaned up my messy room. So I make very clear in the book I was the #1 slob in the family. And so my great Aunt Selma, she comes up, cleans up my room, tosses the comic books. I come back and they're gone. And to this day, I tease my Aunt Selma about this. And she's 50 years later, she's apologetic for this particular incident. And we have a good laugh when we bring it together. In fact, when the book came out, I read her the chapter on Superman, and her face actually turned white. She still felt that mortified feeling that, oh, what did I do, Paulie, with your comic books. And
she was probably trying her best to not only help you but help her sister. So she was your mother's sister.
Yes, there's one of 3 sisters, and there's a small part of the book where I talk about their family background, and that is actually true. Where I felt obliged to talk about my aunts, where they come from. There's a letter that I post from my Uncle Ruby, who was this World War II and Korean War hero. That letter is actually true, and I just felt obliged. I wanted that book to have that stamp of authenticity to it. So years from now, if other family members read it, there it is. So one of the later chapters, I actually do get into some of the family history there.
The beautifully embellished memoir is what I'd call it. It's a couple of your characters, too, I wanted you to talk about. Joe, who,
Yes.
the one black student who was framed for the theft of your clarinet, and that disgusting character plots. I mean, I know every classroom has someone like that, but you bring them to life in a big way.
Yeah, and much of that is true, although the Joe Bailey character, who's a real best friend, really comes into play in high school. And when I encountered some of that racism that was bubbling up in the 60s, and he was my buddy. He did take me to Harlem for that memorable basketball game that's in the book. There was a character, he wasn't named Plots, but who was one of those characters, unfortunately. And in fact, there's an incident where he's involved with a stolen clarinet, my stolen clarinet. That actually did occur. And now, Joe Bailey character was embellished, but the clarinet incident was quite real. And, these were the times. And I wanted to, as I said before, I wanted the book also to speak to the times and the racial times that existed back then. And some of these experiences kind of melded between high school, even college, and the 60s and period. But, I didn't want to get away from that element, which I think is embedded in the book, as well as, controversies over Vietnam, which is secondary, I think, in the book, but it's still there. Mm-hmm. It's a time of tumult in this country. And, the changing Bronx neighborhood, as I mentioned earlier, was just a microcosm of a larger picture going on in America, where we're dealing with who we were as a country, who we are as people in this country. So I hope it resonates there.
Stop hoping it does.
Yeah, well.
So, Paul, what do you do for fun?
What do I do for fun? Well, I'm a professor. I thoroughly enjoy going into the classroom and helping to mold young minds. And I still play basketball. I'm an avid player still. I mention that because basketball is the sport of choice, certainly in Bronxland. And that's a game that's been with me for literally my entire life. I still ride a bicycle all around. I'm an avid bike rider. In the book, the cover itself, as you can see, back in those days, you'd get on a bike and you just go anywhere and everywhere on your bike. It was really your wheels of freedom. And even though I have a car now and all that transportation that's around, I still take the bike. I still take the bike everywhere I go. So I enjoy that. So, I guess I haven't changed all that much, maybe from being a 13-year-old with basketball and bicycles.
Do you still play the clarinet?
And I still play some clarinet, but I play more piano now. I'm still love music. My brother is an incredible pianist, as I kind of imply in this book as well. So music. My father's a violinist, coming from Hungary with his violin. So he gave us that gift of music, and so that was passed down. And on one level, it's a very ordinary life. On one level, it's a very extraordinary life. When you have children and you relive part of your own youth through what they go through, and you take delight, and sometimes you take a little concern in their growing up. Those are certainly gifts that they give to me in terms of rekindling Bronxland. In fact, in the acknowledgments at the very end, I actually give them credit for somehow reviving those memories of youth, because I see it. I see it in what they're going through in their adolescent angst and also their adolescent joy. So,
what kind of feedback did you get from them? Was there any horror over, oh my gosh, I can't believe my father wrote that?
There's certainly a little bit of that in some of the scenes that we've kind of mentioned. A couple of faces turn red, but I have a set of twins actually. Today is their 20th birthday.
Well, happy birthday, twins! Let's do a shout out to them.
There you go, Robbie and Rebecca Thaler. So I just got in contact with them before this interview, and I have an older son who's a screenwriter, an aspiring screenwriter out in Los Angeles. And so they're a great, great bunch. I mean, don't get me off of them. And but I think they've taken some, if not embarrassing delight, but some delight nonetheless in reading Bronxland. And again, I think, the reasons we write, we sometimes don't write for today, we write for tomorrow, by which I mean maybe years from now, somewhere in the family, they'll pick up this book and, they'll enjoy it again.
Well, let me ask you this. Will the story of Paul Wolfenthal continue?
I've been asked that question. I've been letting that idea brew, whether there is another book there. I certainly, there are other years that come into my life. On one level, I wonder if I've said all I needed to say about Paul Wolfenthal, or whether there's another chapter or more in his life. And there are. But I'm going to let that idea percolate. I'm still actually getting over the loss of Paul Wolfenthal, meaning, when you give up a book, you're giving up part of yourself, as you know. And I kind of miss them. I used to, when you write a book for over the course of years, they're part of your life, you're part of their life, these characters. And frankly, letting go of the manuscript to Black Opal Books wasn't all that easy. It was like kind of giving over your children, I suppose, in some sort of way. Maybe a little bit of hyperbole, but there's something to it. So I'll let you know. Laurel, once I kind of come down from the high.
Well, I know that I would be interested in reading the follow-on tale of Paul. To my listeners and my viewers out there today, We've just been talking with Paul Thaler, author of Bronxland, a memorable, amazing, beautiful book that had me giggling and laughing and misty-eyed and took me back to my middle school years. And Paul, I'd just like to thank you for spending this time with me, and I wish you the best of luck with this book and with your others. And how can people get in touch with you if they want to?
Well, the book obviously is through Amazon, Barnes and Noble's online, other sites, Black Opal Books. I do have a Facebook page, so if they want to connect through Facebook.
Are you one of many Paul Thalers? I think there might be others.
That's a good question, actually. There might be one or two other Paul Thalers out there, but there's also another site called JHS 82, Junior High School 82, which is at the centerpiece of this book. And I've just connected to all of these old chums from Junior High School 82, as I was mentioning. So I'm there as well if you want to kind of join our conversation on Facebook. I do have an Instagram account, I think. I am not the most media savvy, I will admit to your audience, but I'm there as well. And, just delighted to speak to any of my readers and connect with you, continue our talk about Bronxland. But I'd like to thank you, especially for making this such a delightful time.
This is always my pleasure. And talk about bringing back words from the past. Chum. Let's bring back chums as a word that we should start using for our friends. And I have one final question for you, Paul. Alligator preserves. There's a story behind that title. What kind of preserves do you spread on your toast in the morning if you have toast?
What kind of preserves? And I do have toast, and I do use strawberry and raspberry preserves. So there, that's what, now that it's a question I can honestly say I've never been asked before, so I had to think about it.
There you have it. How about your favorite color? How about your favorite color?
My favorite color?
Yeah.
Oh, turquoise.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, I like turquoise.
Beautiful. Well,
Yeah.
Paul, I hope to interview you when your next book comes out. Thanks again.
Great. Thanks for letting me visit.
Bye.